My name is Valerie Rake. I'm with the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning. My particular team is Learning Systems and Infrastructure. We are most commonly known as the Carmen team, but increasingly over the last couple of years, we support a range of tools, including Turnitin, which became available to the university sometime this academic year. It's been a bit of a blur, and I don't remember exactly when it happened. Most access through Turnitin at Ohio State is through Carmen. We've set it up as an integration. There are some use cases where it's justifiable to create a separate Turnitin account, but mostly that makes it harder. So there is absolutely no advantage for doing that unless you are one of those special use cases. I had a question from the audience. Is this something you can follow along with? For the setup, absolutely yes, you can. For seeing student submissions, it's a little bit harder, simply because you don't necessarily have a student paper to submit. But I'll show you what you can do, and then what you can expect. I will say that Turnitin is one of those tools that before you use it in a class, I would suggest setting it up in a practice course and drafting a colleague, enroll a colleague as a student, and have them submit something that is a predictable sort of piece of writings where you think you know what the originality report is going to look like, so that you can have some practice in what does it look like to you, what does it look like to your students, how do you interpret the report, all of that kind of stuff. So does that make sense? Does that answer your question? All right. Having said that, this is a particular course that I have used a million times for demos, and sometimes it has things in it that I don't expect. So if I kind of go, that would be why. I'm going to start, actually let me start with the folks here. Do you have any questions that I want to address first? Any concerns? Just how does I use it, right? All right. Actually, let me start with more of a general introduction as well. Address some of the concerns that people have expressed and some of the reasons for using Originality Report. One, when we made this available, we worked specifically with the Center for the Study of Teaching and the writing people. I can't remember what their acronym is. And also with some folks from UCAT and some representatives from the academic misconduct group as well. So one of the things that we really want to emphasize is if you're going to use Originality Report, that you do so with complete transparency with your students. You let students know that you're planning to use it, that you let them know what your intent is in using it, so that they know what to expect. Now, one of the reasons that I really value the integration with Carmen is that this icon right here that looks like an inbox with a magnifying glass or binoculars, that is visible to you and to students, and it says Originality Report is turned on for this folder. So students can see that, but you might take the point of pointing that out to them. And you also want to talk to them about how you're using it, what you want to do with it, and make sure they are aware, because they can see, in most cases, the Originality Report, that they should come to you if they have any questions at all. Because the Originality Report is oftentimes understood to be, and sometimes even promoted as, a plagiarism checker. This will tell you that this paper is plagiarized, and from where? Not so much. What Originality Report says is this set of characters in this paper, and maybe it's gobbledygook because Turnitin doesn't know, matches the same set of characters somewhere else. And it might match those characters in multiple places. And I'll show you how that looks. Your human intelligence, your insight and wisdom as an instructor is how you determine, was this plagiarism? Was this lack of skill? Your involvement in this is what makes this tool valuable. It does not do anything but provide you with some information about this text that the student submitted matches other text. You have to decide the meaning and the value and the implications of that. Does that make sense? That is the super absolute clear thing that you need to understand and that you need to help your students understand. And you need to make a plan for, wow, if I get 65% originality report, what does that mean? What am I going to do? What should students do? That needs to be clear as you set up the assignment and the communication to the students. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's start by setting this up. That was really good timing, wasn't it? To set this up in Carmen, you're going to go to the Dropbox, and I'll create a new folder. Because for the most part, this is just using Carmen's Dropbox. And it's easy for you because you're probably familiar with it, and it's easy for the students because they're familiar with it. Give your folder a name. And as with all of our advice here, make sure your names match what you have on the syllabus and what you have elsewhere so students know what they're looking for. Once you've given it a name, your first option is now enable originality check for this folder. And at a baseline, that's all you need to do. If you've ever used Turnitin from its direct site, you know it takes about 8 steps to do what you just did with that checkbox. So you don't really want to stop there because you do want to at least be aware of the default settings and whether or not you wish to keep them. So you have your usual kinds of Dropbox choices, and those all still apply, including something that you might want to do is linking this to a gradebook item. Okay? Because one of the things that you can opt to do is use the companion tool of GradeMark, which allows you to do your assessment in the Turnitin site, and that will actually push the score you assigned there into Carmen, and then once it's into Carmen, it can go into your Carmen gradebook. That's an optional feature, but it's a thing to think about. If you're going to use that, of course, you do need to put in the out of score that's appropriate to that assignment. But what we're really interested here is to down these originality check options. Those only show up if you've checked that box at the top. And I'm covering up my mic here. You will note Generate Originality Report is checked. I have this by default open, but you might need to open it yourself if you've not used Originality Check before. One of your questions is whether or not to allow students to see the Originality Report. You don't have to do this, but our recommendation is that you do, with appropriate coaching that they come and talk to you about any questions. You can, though, also opt to make GradeMark available to the students, and I'll talk about GradeMark as well. Do you want them to be able to see the feedback from GradeMark? And if so, by what date will you be ready to do that? All right, frequency is a choice, and I can't scroll up any higher, so I'm hoping that, can you see the bottom of that page? If I'm down here looking at these options? Yeah. Okay, good. Frequency is probably something you want to leave as the default. What that means is when a student submits a paper, it goes into the queue at Originality at paradigms.com, and the Originality check is immediately run. It is in a queue, so it's not just like that. It depends on how long the paper is and how much traffic there is, and so it might take 3 to 10 minutes. But what it means is it's in the queue, it's going to happen. This option you might turn on if you were using a gotcha approach, which is to say, ooh, I don't trust you. I'm going to check your paper. You really don't want to do that. That's why we like leaving that at the default. Your next set of things, and you do want to look at this, is By default, your student papers are checked against Turnitin's paper database. This is the thing most people have heard about, all the other papers that have ever been submitted. Also a variety of other resources are there in the database. Current and archived internet, rather daunting. I asked what that meant. And basically they have a spider, just like Google is a spider, goes through and looks at the internet periodically to see what's in Wikipedia and WebMD and all those other places that people tend to look to as reference sources. And what does it look like today, but also what did it look like last week and the week before and all of that. That's what current and archived internet means. It's not behind a password or a firewall or a proxy. It's available on the internet. And then periodicals, journals, and publications. These are from publishers that have agreed with iParadigms to have their material part of the checking database. Now I can, if you have any particular publication that you want to know, hey, is this included? I can get that information for you. To a limited extent, depending on agreements, if you have a text that you would like included, for instance, the textbook that you use you would like to have included, I can ask whether that can be included. It's not my choice, but I can ask. But your question is, do you wish to have your papers compared against any of those sources? Okay. Mostly people say, yes, I want the biggest comparison I can, but it's your choice. The other one that's tricky to think about is index files for originality checking and allow other files to be checked against submission. And there's a couple of double negatives going on there. What that means is, does your student's paper get added to the user paper database, right? So that the first paper in becomes part of the database for everything else in that class, or for the next class, or for anybody else. And you think, well, what's the implications? There's a couple of them. One of them is, one recommendation that we like to make is perhaps to set up a draft submission folder and an actual submission folder so that students can submit their papers, see their originality score, talk with you to identify really what am I supposed to be citing? What am I supposed to be paraphrasing? Where have I not understood how this research-based writing process is supposed to work? And then to correct their errors, to improve their writing, and then to submit it for real. Now, if you're doing a draft folder, you don't want to check that box on the draft folder, because then when they submit it for real, it's going to have a very high score. Hopefully it's not 100%, because hopefully they actually did change things. Otherwise you've all wasted your time. But for instance, that's a reason you might not want to include your papers if you're doing a draft submission process. The other use case that I hear most often about not including is there's a lot of uncomfortableness with this user paper database. Now, OSU Legal has signed off on this, and the writing folks are okay with this, but there's a lot of folks who say intellectual property, copyright, student ownership of their work, is it really ethical to use a tool like this? And this is where I get a little bit twitchy with people. It's like, if you don't like the tool, don't use it. But some folks say, I want to check my stuff against everybody else's, but I'm not comfortable putting my student stuff in the user paper database. Have your cake and eat it too. But if that's one of your concerns, that's where your control is. Any questions about those setups? Okay. Yeah.
Is it more encouraged that students do the draft folder as well with the professors, so that way they can sort of get a better...
Students actually have no independent access.
Okay.
There's no way for students, and that's a great question.
So students can't check their own?
Yeah, there's not a way for students to just kind of jump in and check their own paper without somebody facilitating that access. The Writing Center has talked about this. Some of the athlete support services is talking about being able, as part of a tutoring session on writing, to facilitate that conversation as part of a consultation, but there's not a way, just because of how Turnitin works, for a student to do that independently. And part of that concern is because a lot of times if students' skills are unsophisticated enough to not know when they're plagiarizing, their understanding of the report is not going to be all that accurate either. So it really does kind of make sense that you facilitate that relationship.
Yeah.
Now that assumes that your class process, your staffing, your timing can facilitate a draft meeting, resubmission kind of situation. And I realize in some cases where you've got 400 students, that ain't happening. I get it. But that's some of the pattern on that.
Well, the reason I ask is because I've had friends who are students
Mm-hmm.
who've been caught in that maybe 1 in 500,000, 1 in a million situation where their paper quite possibly mirrors someone else's work, where
Mm-hmm.
they pretty much just came to the same conclusion.
Right.
And it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that's why we encourage instructors to allow students to see the originality report, so that if the student sees, ooh, this is not an accurate representation of my world, they're able to go to the instructor to say, can we talk about this? As opposed to, and this, because
it doesn't just go straight to academic.
well, and it doesn't go straight to academic. And here's the other thing while we're talking about this. Academic Affairs Committee on Academic Misconduct, their position on a Turnitin Originality Report is it is absolutely no different than any other piece of evidence that an instructor might submit as part of a hearing.
Okay.
It carries no more and no less weight regardless of that percentage. Because
so it's inadmissible, basically.
it is admissible, certainly, but it is not authoritative.
Okay.
There is no magic number that says, oh my God, you cheated. Remember that first caveat I gave you. This does not tell you whether the paper is plagiarized.
Yeah.
It merely tells you it matches. It's the human intelligence that makes the value judgment.
I think it has to be very specific to the purpose of your assignment. So, in other words, if your assignment is a paper based on research of journals and periodicals and publications, you want to know, the match, and so you may check that accordingly. If I have a paper for a student in an education class where it's it's possible that they could have taken information from another student in a past class, or they didn't get one part done, so they took it from somebody else in another section. That's where that paper database becomes imperative. So I think it can be very specific to the assignment.
Oh, it has to
the
be.
purpose.
Yeah.
I think it
Yeah.
can't be blanket.
Right, and that's exactly the point, and thank you for articulating that. If you're teaching, for instance, an English course in which part of what you're doing is exegesis of text, you darn well better have that text in there, and that's going to be a match.
Right.
And if you don't have a high enough originality score, that's of concern, for instance.
So if you're quoting something from a text, because you said you could have your particular course text,
It gets added to the overall database,
Right.
sure.
and they're quoting portions from the text, what happens is they may cite it correctly
Yeah.
and quote it, but it still shows as a match.
And
That's why it's not a plagiarism
until you
tool.
have decided.
Yes, because that will come up as a match.
Right,
It
yeah,
should.
yes, and it should. And so what becomes the key, and this is kind of also why I said practice, something where you think you know what the report is going to show you,
Right.
because for any assignment, you're going to find a baseline.
But it doesn't give us specifics on what's the match.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does.
We haven't
Okay,
got
we
there
get to
yet.
the report.
Yes, we're still in the theoretical bit. You're all on top of this.
Got it.
But no, you might say for an English exegesis sort of assignment, I'm going to expect on a well-structured paper something between 20 and 30% match. If it's lower than that, they probably have not quoted what I told them to quote. If it's higher than that, then we might run into some citation problems. On the other hand, in a psych course or a personal essay, the match ought to be 5 or 10%. Because you might do things like Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1864. Well, yeah, but that's common knowledge, so you're going to have some. So what you're looking for is the baseline for your assignment.
That's very
And so your point there is no magic number because it depends on your assignment
specific in your expectations.
and your expectations. And then you get to what was the student doing and what did they think they were doing and is there problematic intent. Does that make sense?
It does.
Great.
I think it'll make more sense when I see the
Yes,
report as
absolutely.
well.
But
And I know that was
Yes.
premature, but I just.
no, that's okay. Roll with what comes. One of the things that will happen after you save this and come back, and this is just a caveat while I'm here, you will see another link that shows up in this area that would let you actually jump to the Turnitin side and manipulate some controls over there. Our recommendation is probably don't do that because the link is a little bit fragile and you can break it. So while the link is there and it's tempting, don't mess with it. While I'm also here talking about settings, before we actually jump into the tool and look at Turnitin itself, is my other caveat. If you are going to use your same course structure in another term and you're going to do copy course components, come in and unlink this before you do copy course components. Come in to all of your folders and uncheck this box before you do copy course components, because what it will do is it will copy the link into the new course but point to the old Turnitin course and it's not going to work. Yes, yes, yes. From a technical standpoint, that is so incredibly stupid. It took us for freaking ever to say, oh, wait a minute, did you? Oh, yeah, that's what you, don't, and then we verified it. Like, oh yeah, you shouldn't do that. Isn't that obvious? No.
So before I
Yeah.
transferred any Dropboxes, I have to go back in
And
at the end of the semester.
and uncheck.
Uncheck the originality
Yeah,
in all of them,
yeah.
then I can copy the
Yep.
course.
And then you come in and
course
recheck.
content.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really annoying.
And then I come in and recheck in my new.
Yes, and recheck it in the new.
That's ridiculous.
I know. I told them it was, and they said, yes, 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 we know. So that's the caveat that we know about this particular integration. Work? Okay.
Is that on the list to get fixed?
Both sides say, not our problem.
Okay.
I actually do have in my inbox, when I have time to look at it, they have a second kind of LTA of integration that uses a different kind of pathway, and we think that might overcome some of these weaknesses, but we haven't had a chance to actually look at what it does. Does it overcome the weaknesses while still giving the functionality? Okay, so let's go, and I'm not actually going to save this. I'm going to go into this example that I currently already have. And this is going to work exactly like any Dropbox folder in Carmen. You're going to click here, and you're going to hide that so you can see what you're looking at. You can see your student submissions. Dropbox works the same as it always has. Click on the link to see what it is. You can go in and leave feedback, publish feedback, all of the same Carmen Dropbox tools you've always had. But you can also see the Originality Report icon. And that's going to show you the information here. And blue means, not to worry about. Of course, this is an arbitrary set of colors. Don't put too much weight on them. Yellow, caution. Orange, more caution. There's also a red. Just take a look at that. And you know, if you've got your baseline, you kind of know what you expect, and you go through and everybody's at your baseline, and you've got 400 students, you might decide to leave it at that unless someone contacts you. Or you might want to look at everything. But this gives you your highest level view of what's going on. Once you're there, you can just click on the icon, and that will jump you over to the Turnitin site. Now, the first time you do this in any given course, it will ask you to click through a terms of use agreement. Has all been approved. Go ahead and sign it. The reason why it's going to ask you that for every single course is because, as far as Turnitin is concerned, the instructor of record for that course is the course, rather than the person teaching the course. Now, on the plus side, from a support perspective, or if you have assistants, if you have instructor access to the course, you can get into the Turnitin stuff. You don't need a special account. You don't need special access. It's not a special role. If you have instructor access to the course, you can get in to do the Turnitin stuff. So, but that's what you do have to, because it's a new course, new instructor, every time you use it. And you have to say, yes, 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 I got this stuff. All right. This paper was, oh, that's nice. That's all right, I didn't want to change it. I've never seen that before. Okay. So this paper was submitted by a graduate student who works with me, who at the time was a student in an Ed P&L course. She's not anymore, but. And it is, in fact, a very well-structured graduate level paper. 11% Originality Report. Pretty nice. What you can see over here is her paper. It's kind of like a PDF. It's an exact copy of the paper. You can scroll down and see the whole thing. And when you get to a part where there is matching text, it will be highlighted and color-coded, and you can match it up by color code and number to the possible matching text. Make sense? And you kind of go through, and you find another funny little quirk of the system. And it helps you understand it's originality match, not plagiarism. Oh, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Oh, I could do this, couldn't I? Works cited are oftentimes identical from paper to paper. So again, you need to know what your baseline is before you get all excited about what those numbers mean. And Megan's paper is, much of her sites are, in fact, her works cited. Yeah.
Is there any way to eliminate that from the lookup?
To a certain extent, yes, there is. Where did my views? There's a filter somewhere, and it might be because this is in an expired course, I can't get to them anymore. I think it probably is. There should be a button down here. That's probably a gear icon or something that lets you turn some things off and on. One of the options there is to turn off bibliography, and it will attempt to ignore the bibliography, assuming that it recognizes the bibliography. One of the other things that you can do in that section is tell it to, actually this is what this is, I think. No, that's what I'm looking at here, is tell it to ignore a particular source. So if you're looking at this and you say, oh, that's my textbook, I'm actually okay with them citing the textbook. I don't care about that. You know, whatever. So you can go in and ignore that, and it will adjust things accordingly. Okay, so there are a couple controls you get there. It's imperfect, but you can make some of those choices there. So let's look at some of these things. You can, let's go back to,
Click on the number, does it jump to it?
yeah.
Okay.
So one of your options is to look here, click the text, and it'll pop you up the context for where this came from, and you can kind of see how they treat it. You can say, can I see more of it? And it will tell you more of it, so you can get a bigger sense of, is this of concern or is this okay? You might, depending on the nature of this, get a link over here to say, this isn't something you can see. So for instance, what if the match is to another student paper? And this is where another one of the big weaknesses of this integration. I think it was an imperfect system on the direct site, and it is more imperfect in the direct integration. What it's supposed to do and what it will promise that it will do is you click on a link if it's a paper, a student paper, and it will say, I'll send an email to the instructor of record to see if they will release this paper to my view.
Wouldn't you also have to have the student?
Not necessarily. What OSU Legal said on that question is that, and this is why we really encourage transparency, is that in turning in the paper, the student is giving you license to do what you need to do in order to do assessment. And it's license, not copyright. Okay. The copyright people I also had a conversation with. Yeah, but that's again why you're looking at transparency. Anyway, so what that's supposed to do is send an email to the instructor of record of the other course to say, will you release this paper? Well, the weakness in the original design is, what person in their right mind gets an email from a machine and clicks on a button to say yes? And if you are, you're as stupid as your students. Okay, so it was a bad system. Okay, remember I told you in this integration, the instructor of record is the course? Those emails are going absolutely nowhere. So if in fact your match is to another student paper, you've got to fall back to non-originality report sleuthing methods to figure out whether this is of concern.
And I'm trying to make sure I understand how will it designate that it's from another paper?
Let me see. There's one. So I can click over here as well, and it will jump me here. So it's number 6. Submitted to National University student paper. Do you see how this is? And what this actually is both Megan and this other student cited the same source. But if it were actually content, what this is going to show you is that I can't show you that other source because it hasn't been specifically released.
Well, so you're going to get that with probably a lot of your papers if they all use the same source.
It depends on your assignment.
Right.
What about your own paper in 2 different courses?
So a student has written the same paper for 2 courses. They might, in fact, be checked against themselves.
You're actually not allowed to do that.
Well, there's allowed
And there's,
actual.
yes. Yes, exactly. They're not allowed to, but this does not mean they don't.
Double dipping.
Yeah. Well, but then there's the also, especially when you get into the graduate students,
Unless
where
they tell
you,
if you did
right.
this for this,
Right,
then I
or
want you
even to
go
these
get
things,
this
is my particular research is around X, and so I'm going to write variations of the same paper, or my lit review is going to be the same across 3 different papers, even though the other 30 pages are the same.
maliciously.
Yes, in order to get out of work, you're not supposed to do this, but yeah, that does not mean it's not going to happen.
Well, no, totally. I totally
Yeah.
know that.
No, but it does give you one of the flaws in the system. Is that if it is a student paper, you've got to fall back on other methods to sluice out the source. And sometimes you can pick that up from the context of what's highlighted. Do you recognize it? Does it sound like somebody you know? That kind of stuff.
It becomes much narrower.
But yes, it does let you say, not those things, maybe these things. Does that make sense? Okay, but that's what it looks like. And you can click the button and it'll send an email, and you will wait with bated breath for something to happen, and nothing will. All right. So one of your strategies, again, is to just go through and look at the highlighted bits, click on them. Or you can start at this side and jumped around. I like this one, Susan Mitros. Megan did not, in fact, know that Susan Mitros had a history with us when she cited her. One of the interesting things, and Megan's, this paper, actually let me jump to a different paper because this is better shown. One of the things that you can do once you're in the Turnitin site is navigate to all of the other papers. Now, it assigns a fairly random user designation to the students. So you can't know who submitted what by looking at this drop-down, but as you navigate to the next paper and the next paper and the next paper, you'll see who they're from. You can also, by the by, navigate to any other drop boxes for your course, because remember, it's the instructor, the course is the instructor, so any other Dropbox folders you have linked to that course will all be here. So once you get over here, you just work over here. Now you will note I only had one Dropbox folder in my Carmen course. I've got 5 here. It's because I've been messing around with the same practice course for, you should not see that. It should be an exact match. Don't do what I do. But I want to show you, I asked Megan, since her test sample was so well constructed, to do me a hash job. So she went to Wikipedia and grabbed some stuff. And it came back, hey, look, 46% match to Wikipedia. That's great. So one of the things that you can do is, look, I got a little arrow that says, ooh, more. And what it does is to say, hey, look, there's a 46% match to Wikipedia and a 36% match to worldofbuildings.com and a 28% match to friendly cleaners and end of tenancy cleaners and one off cleaning land and inventories London and all carpets and what the huh? And so you click on any one of those and it takes you to the website. Now what's going on here is what percentage of this text matches there. It's all kind of related. And this is where you start drilling around trying to figure out what's the story. It might be that half a dozen students cited the same thing out of Susan Mitros' paper. And you kind of, oh, okay, they're all showing up here because they all cited the same paper, and you can see that as you investigate. And you say, okay, that's fine. There is an acceptable citation of a well-regarded source, and a bunch of people have agreed with that. Make sense? What you find out here is these are a bunch of buildings in London near Hammersmith Bridge, and their addresses is on their website. So sometimes what you find here is nonsense.
The machine is fallible.
The machine is highly fallible. Recall first caveat, human intelligence is what you're looking at. This is a tool. It does not supersede you in any way. It just provides you with some data. Make sense? Good. I love this example because it was like, what the heck? So that's what that means.
rabbit hole does it go?
Just down to 22%. And I looked at all of those sites, and the only, other than there apparently is a real bunch of cleaning places and laundries and dry cleaners and stuff near Hammersmith Bridge. Things you find out. Yeah.
Jeopardy question.
Oh yeah, where is? I don't know. All right, so let's go on. I'm going to go back to Megan's project. actually, let's do some other kinds of navigations. Let's go here. You can use these little arrows. There's Megan's paper. Here's a random thing I submitted. Just to see what shows up. PowerPoint kind of works. Dinosaurs. So you can do PowerPoints. You cannot do Excel. Much to common, there's only 10 digits. I think there's sort of diminishing returns there is why they didn't even try that one. They also said, no, you can't submit anything that's actually code, which somebody had asked about that at a workshop.
Like computer coding?
Yeah.
C++.
Yeah, if you're looking for, is this student submitting original code?
Oh, okay.
It's not going to know what to do with that.
The thing with code anyways, that's extremely derivative as well.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the things, Excel and code are the two things and pictures. If it's a PDF that's OCR, it should work. But most of us don't bother with the whole OCR on a PDF. If it's a PDF that's a picture, it probably won't even run the report. All right. So are there any questions about Turnitin itself and about the Originality Report? Oops, let's go back to this paper. Do you get a sense of how you would work with this and how you would move from paper to paper and make things done? Okay? So a couple of other things while I'm here. You can read the paper and assign a score, whatever you might think is appropriate. And clearly I can't do that here. Didn't realize I had done this. But you can put a score there. And what will happen, one thing I like about this is it does tend to open in a new window or a new tab, depending on your browser settings, so you can pop back and forth fairly easily. When you go back into your Dropbox and you go into the feedback area, what you're going to see is, again, the Originality Report. You're going to see the score that was assigned, and you can say, yeah, I want to use this. And that's going to pop it into this score box, which will pop it into your gradebook. So you don't have to do it twice. Yeah?
Is there a setting that you could take that for all of them? You have to do it.
Now you have to do it each one. And that I have ended up deciding after having half a dozen conversations with people that that's actually a good thing, because the way students view the Originality Report and any feedback you've left there is not necessarily obvious, and they don't get a notification. On the other hand, if you come here and say, I want to use this and provide your narrative commentary here, and click publish or update or whatever stage you're in, then the student gets a notification, hey, I've looked at this. And so have a little bit of copy-paste. Remember how I showed you how to get this feedback? Go see your real feedback on the Turnitin side. But this lets you, hey, signal to the students, I'm done looking at your paper. You can go look at it now. And so I actually think that that's a flaw that is not a horrible thing. Better if you could say yes to all, but it's not a bad workaround, in fact. So let me show you in the half.
You said something,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You said so you can make notes. I missed making notes on the paper when you.
I'm going to show you that right now.
Okay, I didn't miss that?
No, you didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Because I say, wait a minute, let me show you how the grade flow works,
Okay.
and then I'll come back to that. But just to say, you can put a grade in just at the Originality Report stage and come back here, say you want to use it, and provide feedback this way.
Okay.
If you are going to use Turnitin's grading feature, you're going to be here, and then you're going to click over here to grade mark. And you go to blue rather than red. Notice how everything changes colors. And I'm not sure it's going to let me do anything given that this is an apparently expired course. But what you can do, I've got some stuff already in here. You can grab one of these common kinds of things and just drag it over, and it's not going to let me do anything. I didn't have time to check my demo before I came over this morning.
Can you insert your own?
Yes, yes. So these are standard kinds of things. You can also create some of your own standard comments, and they come in your little Tetris box. Or you can actually just highlight some text, and it will bring you up a pop-up box, and you can type in your inline comments, which I think is probably the best way to do it. You can highlight something and click here, or highlight something and I think you right-click. You'll have to play around with it a bit since I'm not in a position to demonstrate it for you, and bring up your own box and make your custom inline comments. One of the neat things about these custom inline comments is as you save it, you can actually say, save this for me to use again. Because I know from teaching, especially on any given assignment, it's like, oh, people are making this common mistake in this particular assignment. Let me run with this. Now, this applies, as far as I know, to your course, because this is Turnitin, your course in Turnitin. I think your comments would apply to any, would still be available for another assignment, I think. But that.
So when a student, okay, so you do this,
Mm-hmm.
and the student and you've said that your feedback has been provided.
Mm-hmm.
So for the student to see your comments.
That's the thing I will show you next. That's all right. You're letting me know that I've in fact covered all the right points. But I want to make sure you're aware of how you can put individual comments in, standardized comments in. There's actually a number of, I keep looking at the wrong thing, other built-in comments that you might want to use. Now, I have got these set at the defaults. If the campus commonly said, no, really, let's default to punctuation, I can set that, but I would need some sort of consensus. I think for the most part, the commonly used ones is probably a good place to be. The other thing that I can apparently do is create a set of comments that would be available system-wide. So, for instance, if everybody in a unit in EHE says, we want a set of comments that address these issues, because we always address these issues, I believe that I could create them, and they would be available to the university, but they would also be available to you. No one has asked me that yet, but I believe I have that potential. I think it would be cool. You have a place down here where you can write text comment. Although, again, I think it's better to do that in the Carmen side. You can also do a voice comment, which you can't do in Carmen because it's on their servers. So that might be a nice feature. There is also a place where you can look at all of the comments you have added to all of the pages. You know, and you, like, now I've got 2 there. Something, there's where I click. So if you wanted to summarize or your students wanted to see that. There is also a rubric tool within Turnitin, which I have not played with yet, other than to know it is much less complex than Carmen's rubric tool. So if somebody plays with it and gives me a good summary, I would really appreciate it. So those are your options for grading on the Turnitin side. Any questions about that? You good? All right, let's look at the student side then. I'm back here in my Carmen course. And I'm going to go back. This is a testing course. It has all kinds of weird stuff in it. And I'm going to change my role to students just to show you what this is going to look like to the student side. When a student goes into Dropbox, again, they can see, hey, Originality Report is turned on. They don't yet have any feedback yet because this is the generic role switch student. But they can also go to View History. And as a service to your students, would you tell them about this View History button? Because this will tell the student everything that they have submitted to every Dropbox. And it is vastly more reliable than those random emails that they try to use to claim that they submitted something at such and such a time. This is the authoritative source, not the email. So as a general piece of advice, when you encounter a student, View History is what I want to hear about, not I got an email or I didn't get an email. But as you can see, they can navigate through their folders. They can see their Originality Report. Were grade mark released on this assignment, they would see a grade mark. Oh, forgot that that's live. They would see another icon there that would take them directly to the Originality Report. And they can jump from there to Turnitin and see their evaluation, your comments, whatever you've got. There's the user agreement.
Now, if they do that once for my course and then somebody else is doing it.
It's because they're in another course, they're another user.
Well, I figured.
Yeah. And so they can navigate around to see both of those pieces. So now we have in our resource center an article that's called Turnitin Students. And so that would be, for your reference, you can give it as a link in your syllabus or your news item to support whatever it is you tell them about how to find this and what they ought to do if they are concerned with their Originality Report score. Now, one other thing to tell you about while we are here. This little icon at the very bottom in the corner says view information about this paper. And so you've got some submission information. There's your data and details. The other one gives you a download, a PDF to download and print. One of them is a receipt. So should you want a receipt or should the student want a receipt? This is, though, the actual report. Formatted differently because it's PDF rather than digital. And it's Adobe, but that gives you or the student a takeaway copy that, should you want to sit down and talk about it, or should you need to submit something to COAM, that's what you'd be submitting, is that PDF. And the link for that, again, is down here at the bottom of the Turnitin page. It looks vaguely like a printer. Okay? And that's where, and it's available to you and it's available to students. Now the other thing, which is kind of cool, the instructor side has a third icon. It's right there in the middle, which is a tablet device, an iPad-y sort of thing. This is a app that you can download. I know it works for iPad. I think it works for the Android family. I'm not sure about any of the others. I'm not positive about Android either, but I'm pretty much they do that now. Download it yourself. We don't support it in the sense that it's not our tool. We have no insight into it. We have no control, but it's available. And what you do is you click on that and you say, I want to grade this sequence of stuff on my iPad offline. And so you ask it to generate a code, and you get that code and you enter it into the iPad app, and that's how it connects up. So you've got to do some careful typing, but that lets you view your Originality Report, do the navigating, do the grade mark, enter the scores, and it goes into the Turnitin system and then it will sync it back to your Carmen course. So if you have struggled with, I would really like to grade on my iPad, but I don't find the Carmen iPad interface useful, this is actually not bad. So it's a nice little workaround that we totally didn't ask for, but we got anyway. And we also told Desire to Learn that their grading app sucks, but this one works. So that's the other thing you need to know is information, printing, and the iPad option. Any other questions or concerns? Did I answer all of your questions? Did I answer yours? You good? Kelvin? All right.
Thanks, Val. Thank you.
All right, very good.